Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bob Christophel. I serve as the Manager of Benefits Education at Wespath Benefits and Investments. I want to welcome you to this webinar with the focus being the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Before we get started, I'd like to offer you a couple of technology tips. The platform we're using is GoToWebinar. There is a toolbox, usually in your upper right-hand corner, that has both audio and speaker settings. If you are uncomfortable with your audio, look at the radio buttons. You can switch from phone to computer audio or from computer to phone audio. Also, if you're not happy with the speaker that was chosen, you can switch to a different speaker. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. The webinar is intended to help you navigate some recent updates to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and to point you in the right direction to the resources that are available to you to help determine if you're eligible for federal student loan forgiveness. We encourage you to type in your general questions. Please use the question box. We've already gotten a tremendous amount of questions even before the webinar started. At the end, when our guest speaker has concluded, I'm going to raise up some of those questions, which I think will help the entire group. But Scott Filter has also agreed to follow up with you after the webinar, because we realize we won't be able to get to all of your questions during the live broadcast. Wespath is just really very pleased to welcome Scott Filter. Scott is a senior advisor in the Office of Students and Young Lenders at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Hello, Scott. It's great to see you again. We recently had Scott on our Delivered to You virtual event talking about this very topic, but we wanted to make it available to a much broader audience. So it's great to see you again, Scott. We thank you for your participation and look forward to hearing your comments on this important program.
Thank you, Bob. I'm happy to be here with your members today to share them some important information on PSLF. Good afternoon, everyone. As Bob mentioned, I'm Scott Filter, a senior advisor in the Office of Students and Young Consumers at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and previously at the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Post-Secondary Education, where I worked on federal financial regulatory policy. Thank you for tuning in to our presentation today on the public service loan forgiveness. This webinar is intended to help you navigate some recent updates to the PSLF program and how you might be able to take advantage of loan forgiveness for public service employees. Let's start with our standard disclaimer. This presentation is being made by a CFPB employee on behalf of the Bureau. It does not constitute legal interpretation, guidance, or advice. Any opinions or views stated during this presentation are my own and may not represent the Bureau's views. Today's discussion is going to focus on PSLF, including how student loan borrowers can become eligible, how to apply, and then we'll discuss some recent changes to the PSLF program through a limited waiver opportunity. We'll also go over some additional resources and other materials to help you stay on track with your student loans. First, a little bit about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The CFPB is a federal government agency that works to improve consumer finance markets by making rules more effective, by enforcing those rules, and by empowering consumers to take more control over their financial and economic lives. I'm from a division within the CFPB that focuses on helping consumers navigate financial products and services. We serve the general public, but we also focus on a series of special populations, including service members, older Americans, traditionally underserved communities, and students and young consumers. We help students and young consumers to prepare for financial decisions, such as paying or saving for college, managing money, building credit, and of course, repaying student debt, all with an eye towards preventing student loan default or other negative consequences. With that in mind, today we're going to talk about public service loan forgiveness, or PSLF. PSLF was established to encourage individuals to pursue careers in public service. Those who choose to work in public service often face substantial financial hardship and may not be able to repay their loans within the standard 10-year repayment period. This program was designed to help those employees provide a service to the public and satisfy their student debt repayment obligations. So what is PSLF? PSLF is a program where a student loan borrower can qualify for loan forgiveness by paying their loans for 120 months while working in public service for a qualifying employer. And we'll break down this definition and go over the qualifying criteria to reach PSLF. Under the original requirements of the program, to receive credit, you needed 4 things. The right loan, it had to be a direct loan. 2, the right repayment plan, it had to be an income-based repayment plan. 3, an on-time repayment made, while 4, being employed full-time for a qualifying employer. Now, it should be noted that an income-based repayment plan may result in a $0 payment. And if that occurs, that means you will still get credit for the on-time payment portion of the requirements while still not making a payment on your student loans. You still would be required to meet the employment qualifications to receive credit, but you would not have to worry about making an actual payment. To receive credit for PSLF, payments must be made for the same month that an individual works for a qualifying employer to receive credit. However, if you've met that criteria in the past and have not received credit for it, it's not too late to receive that credit. You just need to submit a PSLF form that includes past employment that you have not received credit for. You may need someone at that organization to sign off for attestation purposes, but it's not too late. If you can't reach someone at your previous employer to verify your employment, the PSLF form will prompt you on what to do as you fill it out. Now, what if you did not work full-time for one qualifying employer, but you worked part-time for multiple qualifying employers? As long as the total number of hours that you work for qualifying employers total 30 hours or more for a particular month each week, you can receive credit for it. You just need to claim both employers on a PSLF form to get credit for each employer. And it's important to stress that both employers do need to be a qualified employer, which we'll go into shortly. Additionally, others in this room might ask if a cosigner meets the qualifications for PSLF, or if a parent paying on their children's loans can qualify for PSLF. PSLF is specifically for the borrower and focuses on the borrower meeting the PSLF qualifications. So in the examples I just provided, if they are direct loans, which is the appropriate loans you need to receive PSLF, there would not be a cosigner because there is not a credit check on these loans. If you have a loan where you are a cosigner, those are most likely private loans and do not qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Second, if you're making payments for your child's loans, that will provide credit for the on-time payment requirement so long as you do make them on time. But for the loans to be forgiven through PSLF, they still need to meet the other requirements, which again were being the right loan and having the right repayment plan, and that the borrower, which in this case would be the child or student, would have to be employed full-time for a qualified employer. So just remember again that for that final requirement, the borrower would have to be employed full-time by the nonprofit employer to receive credit for PSLF. The CARES Act that was signed into law late March of 2020 codified a student loan payment pause that began by the U.S. Department of Education that has been extended through August 31st, 2022. During this time, payment for all federally held student loans have been paused. Even without payment, though, individuals are receiving credit towards the PSLF program so long as they still meet the employment criteria. On October 6th of 2021, the Department of Education announced that for a limited time, borrowers can receive credit for past payments that would not have otherwise qualified for PSLF. With this limited waiver, If you have been working in public service but have never explored PSLF, or you were previously discouraged from taking advantage of PSLF because you had the wrong types of loans or repayment plan, this is the time to take advantage of the limited waiver and consider whether you want to explore PSLF. Under this limited waiver, any prior payment will count as a qualifying payment. It does not matter the type of loan or the repayment plan, or even whether the payment was made in full or on time. Under the regular program, you would have needed to make an on-time payment while working full-time with a qualified employer. The PSLF waiver provides some flexibility, but when that waiver ends, you will have to return to making on-time payments while working full-time for a qualified employer to receive credit towards forgiveness. Now, in any event, you can receive forgiveness even if you are no longer working for a qualified employer at the time that you apply for forgiveness or when you actually receive that forgiveness. Now, this limited waiver is truly a time-limited opportunity, and it expires on October 31st, 2022, which I will stress many times throughout this presentation. To receive credit for past payments, you must take action prior to that deadline. Your next steps will depend on what type of loans you have, and we'll go into that over the next few slides. If you're unsure of what type of loans you have, you can log into the Department of Education's website, studentaid.gov, to find out more information. All of your federal student loans will be listed after you log in with your username and password, and then you'll need to know what type of loans you have before you can move on to the next steps. Now, to qualify for PSLF, as we said, you must make 120 on-time payments while working for a qualifying employer. Any federal, state, or local government or military service is considered qualifying employment, along with any nonprofit that is a 501c3 or an organization that is providing certain types of qualifying public service. Prior to the last administration's negotiated rulemaking on faith-based entities at the U.S. Department of Education, individuals who worked for employers that were engaged in religious instruction, worship services, or proselytizing did not qualify for public service loan forgiveness. However, on August 14th, 2020, the Department of Education published new regulations on the PSLF program that clarified that and implemented specific approval for counting hours spent on religious instruction, worship, proselytizing, and fundraising toward the full work requirement for PSLF, opening the doors for religious employees to begin to qualify for PSLF. Now, it only matters if you work for a qualifying employer. It does not matter what you do. As an example, if you work for a public school, all of those employees qualify, whether you're an administrator, an assistant, or a classroom teacher. Your church will qualify as an employer so long as it receives a 501c3 designation from the IRS. For most of the larger, more established denominations, your national organization will receive that designation, and it will filter down to your individual church or diocese. Smaller churches without a larger national structure can still qualify for the tax-exempt status, but it may be on a church-by-church basis. In both cases, you'll want to make sure that your church has that IRS tax exemption by contacting your HR department. On your application for the PSLF form, a question will specifically ask you about your employer having tax-exempt status from the IRS, and you would indicate that your employer does, so long as it does. If the Department of Education's PSLF help tool does not recognize your employer, do not panic. It simply means that the department has not yet processed an application from your employer, or you somehow spelled it slightly differently than how they have it in their web database. The Department of Education staff will do some research after you submit the name of your employer, and will add it to the database after confirming tax-exempt status. As a personal example, in filling out one of my prior previous jobs with the PSLF form, I worked at the Department of Education and put the Department of Education itself into its database, and it was not there. So just so you know, since I've received credit for that job, they will go in and add it, so it's nothing to panic about. If you've done it a while back, you may want to contact your loan servicer just to check on the status of it, but again, not something to panic about. Now, there are some small differences here with your employer that you should note, that you want to make sure is correct when you enter it. For example, you may work for a religiously affiliated school, but not the church itself. So long as that school is a nonprofit school, you'll still qualify for PSLF credit, but your employer may not actually be the church in all cases. However, if the church does own the school, the church may still be your employer. So you should definitely ask your HR office who your technical employer is and find the information and make sure that you're inputting the correct information and the correct tax-exempt status. Now, again, the important thing here to note is it's the employer's tax-exempt status that qualifies you for PSLF. As we'll note again in this presentation, it is not what you do to qualify for that loan forgiveness. You could be a janitor or office assistant and qualify for loan forgiveness, or you could be the CEO or a vice president and also qualify for tax forgiveness. And now that includes clergy as well. Now, what about contractors versus directly paid employees? To qualify for PSLF, you must be an employee of the organization, which means that you will receive a W-2 from that organization at the end of the year to summarize your earnings. A 1099 is usually received for contracting work and is given for non-employee compensation and specifically would disqualify you from receiving PSLF credit because it indicates that you are not a regular employee of that organization. Now, if you have questions about whether your employer qualifies for PSLF, use the Department of Education's PSLF Help tool prior to submitting your PSLF form. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that you need to work full-time, and that means you must meet your employer's definition of full-time employment, or you must work at least 30 hours a week. Again, as we mentioned before, if you're employed in more than one qualifying part-time job at the same time, you may meet the full-time work requirement if you work a combined average of at least 30 hours per week with all of your employers combined. Now, you need to make sure that your payments count. Only payments made after October 1st, 2007 will count towards PSLF because that is when the program was created. The Department of Education has not published official guidance on how the PSLF waiver will interact specifically with those who are employed by religious employers, so you'll need to follow the following steps I lay out in the next few slides to have your case reviewed by your loan servicer. You do need 120 payments to qualify for PSLF, but those payments do not have to be consecutive. If you start to work in public service and then move to a private sector position, you can always return to public service later and continue to qualify for PSLF. And it's always a good advice to keep a record of your payment history. So download a copy and save it for your files on a regular basis. We also recommend that you fill out a PSLF form with updated qualifying employment each and every year so that you can make sure that you're still on track to receive credit for PSLF. If you have not filled out a PSLF form and filed it to obtain approval for your work experience, you will want to pay attention to the next two slides to know exactly what to do. If you have filed a PSLF form already, you should contact your student loan servicer to see if your employment prior to the enactment of the faith-based entities rules have been counted for PSLF under the waiver. So let's talk about how you qualify for PSLF if you already have direct loans. If you log into studentaid.gov and find out that you have all direct loans, the only thing you need to do is make sure that you've submitted a PSLF form with all of your qualifying employment. If you have not submitted a PSLF form, you should fill out a form with all of your qualifying employment again by October 31st, 2022 to receive credit under the limited waiver. If you've worked for several public service employees, make sure you have a PSLF form for each and every one of them. And again, each of those forms need to be submitted by October 31st, 2022. Special note for borrowers for Parent Plus loans who are trying to receive credit for PSLF. Generally, Parent Plus loans will not qualify for the PSLF limited waiver. If you have a Parent Plus loan and want to learn more about PSLF, you should contact your loan servicer for more information about your options, as it is a confusing process. They can walk you through your next steps based on your individual situation. However, according to the Department of Education StudentAid.gov website, individuals with Plus loans should know two things about trying to get PSLF for those loans. One, for Parent Plus loans, PSLF requirements around full-time employment at a qualified employer would again apply to the borrower, which in this case would be one of the parents and not the student. And two, a Plus loan may not be repaid under an income-based repayment plan, so it cannot qualify for PSLF under its own auspices. However, a parent could consolidate it into a direct consolidation loan, which would then allow the parent to repay it under an income contingent repayment plan and start to qualify for PSLF. Now, what if you have other federal student loans that are not direct loans? These loans could be FFEL program loans, also known as the Federal Family Education Loan Program. They may be Perkins loans or another type of federal loan. If you want to be considered for the PSLF limited waiver, you need to complete a direct consolidation loan application again by October 31st, 2022. You can fill out an application to consolidate directly on the Department of Education's website, but you must complete the application by the deadline, or you will lose out on this opportunity to get past payments to count and to qualify towards PSLF. Be sure to act within that time frame to get the credit for those payments. If you do submit a direct consolidation loan application, do not wait to also submit any PSLF forms to get credit for past periods of qualified employment. You must also fill out the PSLF form with all of your qualifying employment information to receive credit, not just the direct consolidation loan application. And all of these forms, again, must be submitted by October 31st, 2022 to be considered for this limited waiver. I can't express that that date is important enough. After the PSLF waiver ends, the PSLF will go back to its normal parameters, which would require that to receive credit towards it, one would need to make on-time payments while working full-time for a qualifying employer with the right type of loan in the right repayment plan. The good news, though, is that being a clergy member or working for a religious employer will continue to count beyond the waiver ending to receive credit going forward. So what does it look like when you receive forgiveness under the PSLF program? This is important information, especially at this time of year when we've just filed our annual income taxes. Based on the legislation that implemented the PSLF program, any forgiveness from the PSLF program is not taxable for the purposes of your federal income taxes. In most circumstances, when one has forgiven debt, that forgiven debt is often considered untaxed income. However, any canceled debt from your federal student loans under the PSLF program is tax-free. Also, due to other legislation passed within the last year, any student loans forgiven for any reason is considered tax-free for federal income tax purposes for the next 5 years. If you'd like more information or would like to share the information that we've discussed today, the CFPB has also created a series of guides to help public service employees qualify for PSLF and the limited waiver. We have guides tailored towards several public service careers, so choose the one that's most correct for you. These guides are available to download on the link available here on this slide. I also want to share some additional resources for you. The Department of Education has a series of frequently asked questions available on their website, as well as a tool to help you navigate PSLF. Bookmark these first 2 pages so that you can stay up to date on any new FAQs or additional guidance from the Department of Education. If you'd like to take next steps and consolidate the loans to qualify for PSLF, the link to the consolidation application is also here on this slide. Now, if you have additional questions, we always recommend that you contact your loan servicer first, as they'll have the most accurate and up-to-date information on your individual case. But if you run into a problem dealing with them, you can always contact the FSA Ombudsman Group or submit a complaint with the CFPB, and both links are available at the bottom of this slide. I'd also like to share one additional resource that our team provides. The CFPB's Office of Students and Young Consumers offers a podcast for student loan borrowers, young consumers, and those who serve them. The Financial Intuition podcast focuses on a variety of topics pertaining to saving and paying for higher education, managing money, and repaying student loan debt. Our team will share interviews with financial practitioners, students and recent graduates, family members, and young adults that have successfully managed their money and repaid their student debt. You can access our podcast by following the link provided on the slide, and we hope that you'll subscribe to future episodes. Thank you for listening to our webinar today. If you'd like to sign up for our email list to get future notices of webinars or other materials produced by the CFPB, please visit our sign up link on this slide. Again, the last bit of information I'd like to leave you with is that all forms, whether it be a consolidation application or a PSLF form to qualify under the PSLF limited waiver, must be submitted to the Department of Education by October 31st, 2022. That's just a few months away, so I would not wait to do it if I were you. Thank you very much. I hope you found that this information enjoyable and useful. And I'll now turn it back over to Bob to facilitate questions.
Thank you, Scott, just so much for sharing that important information. And I'll just remind everybody that's on this webinar, we will send out a copy of the slides with those important resources, as well as a link to the recording. We do have a second webinar on Wednesday, 12:30 Central Time. Scott, a lot of questions came in, and I'll forward you the ones we couldn't get to, but we've lifted up 10 questions, which I think will be for the benefit of the entire group. So, first one, the government has suspended payments on federal student loans for the past 2 years. Will people still get credit for PSLF for that period of time?
Yep, for the most part, individuals who are not paying currently because of the CARES Act payment suspension will receive credit towards PSLF so long as they're still employed full-time for a qualifying employer. There are a couple of minor exemptions to that. If you are in some sort of deferment or forbearance based on going to school still, or you are still currently enrolled in school where you haven't started repayment yet, or you're in your grace period, which is usually a 6-month period of time after you've completed school, you would not receive credit for those periods of time. But by and large, most individuals will have received full credit for the CARES Act period.
Okay. How do I get PSLF for PLUS loans I took out for my child's education? So regarding PLUS loans.
Yep, I'm glad you brought that up again. It's always good to reiterate some information, especially on the PLUS loan, which goes by so quickly. So again, just remember 2 things if you're trying to get credit for PLUS loans for the PSLF program. The first is that the employment aspect of the requirements goes to the borrower of that loan. So in this case, that would be one of the parents and not the student. I'm sorry. Yeah, it goes to the parents and not the student because they are the borrower in this. And then the other thing is that you have to consolidate that loan because the PLUS loan by itself doesn't have the right repayment plan. So it's important that you contact your student loan servicer. They can walk you through all the steps needed to get that into the right direct consolidation loan form and that help you select the right repayment plan so you can start receiving credit for that PLUS loan.
Yeah, I think this next question, Scott, a lot of our participants might be in this situation. If I'm paying my child's student loans, can we get PSLF?
And that's what I stumbled on there for just a second. I started confusing what's a PLUS loan and what's paying back for your child's loan. And this is similar. If you're paying your child's loan, again, that employer aspect of it goes to the borrower. So great that you're making the payments, but your child still has to be employed full-time by a qualifying employer to receive credit for that part. It's great that you're making those payments. You'll definitely receive on-time payment credit for that as long as you make it on time. So make sure that you do frequently talk with your child so you know when their payment due dates are, because you don't want to miss out on that. And then, of course, that it's kind of their responsibility to make sure that it's the right loan and the right repayment plan. And you can kind of figure that out once and be good to go with that for the remainder of the loan.
Okay. Scott, what about payments someone made before consolidation? Before they consolidated those loans, will that count toward the program?
Yeah, that's a good question. So traditionally, when one consolidates a loan, they lose all credit they've received up to that point for PSLF. However, based on that limited waiver that they have, if they do it before October 31st, 2022, they should be able to get some of that back credit for it. So if they don't have the current loans right now, or they've lost previous credit, they can submit a PSLF form for that back period time, and the department should go back in and give them credit for the entire time of that loan, even if they weren't in the right loan or didn't have the right repayment plan. So that's why it's important for everybody to act on it by October 31st, 2022.
And this is probably worth repeating as well. What will happen when the PSLF limited waiver ends this coming October 31st?
Yes. Once that happens, you go back to needing the 4 different requirements to receive any credit whatsoever. That would be the right type of loan, direct loans, right repayment plans. It has to be an income-based repayment plan. You have to make an on-time payment. And while you make that payment, you also have to be employed full-time by a qualifying employer. What won't change is that having a religious job or working for a religious employer will still get credit moving forward. But for any past missed opportunities, such as not having the right loan or repayment plan, you would no longer be able to receive back credit for any payments you made if you don't meet that October 31st deadline.
All right, Scott, this 2 people actually asked this pretty identical question. I haven't made the full 120 on-time payments. Is there a provision to receive partial forgiveness for those?
If you haven't received the 120 yet, they won't consider you for any forgiveness yet. So you can't receive, like, after 5 years, half of your loans are forgiven. But the good news is that if you did leave at some point from working for a qualifying employer, but you're still working towards that progress, the 120 payments, you can keep doing it or come back to a qualifying employer and still move forward and get your loan forgiveness once you hit that 120 mark. So the good thing is you don't have to do it consecutively. You can do 2 years here, 3 years there, and cobble it all together into 10 years.
This one I think is interesting, Scott. The participant works for a contractor that is contracting with a qualified employer and asking if they can receive credit for that as a contractor status.
Contractors are a little bit difficult because there's kind of 2 types, right? There's the first one where I work for another entity that contracts with a nonprofit. And in that case, the person who's making your payments and giving you an actual salary is not the nonprofit itself, but it's that contractor. And generally, contractors are for profit, so you would not be able to receive it in that situation. It becomes a little bit more muddled when you're saying, well, I contract directly with the nonprofit. And so far, the guidance from the Department of Education is that you have to be an actual full employee with them, which means that you're receiving that W-2 form rather than the 1099, which is specifically for non-employees.
Okay. This one also was raised by several participants in the webinar. Can I receive PSLF credit while I'm enrolled in school or in my grace period?
Generally, if it was for a previous loan that you're still making payments on because you went back to school, you could receive some sort of credit as long as you still meet the other requirements, which would be working full-time while you're also going to school, which is why most people don't get it. However, if you go into any type of loan deferment or forbearance because you've gone back to school and you're no longer making payments, you would not receive credit for that period of time. Also, for any loans that you take out during that period, since you're in school, you have not started repayment until after you finish that 6-month grace period. So you could not receive credit for those loans until you've hit that point.
All right. Another common question I saw several times. Who from my employer is actually going to sign these PSLF forms for me?
It's always a good question, the technical aspects of it. The Department of Education has not specified exactly who needs to do it. So your organization may be different from somebody else's. It could be that your HR office decides that there's such a great volume of them that one person in particular in the HR office will have purview of it, and you route the forms to them, and they can look you up in the system to show that you're a full-time employee. But in other cases, it might just be your direct employer who has knowledge that you're working full-time for that organization. Department of Education has not stated it should be one or the other, so it could be either.
Okay. And then our final question, number 10. This is interesting. If I have a direct loan and another type of federal loan, do I need to consolidate these loans in order to receive the forgiveness?
If you want forgiveness on both loans, then yes, you would. And now would be the perfect time for that, because the PSLF waiver will let them go back and give you back credit for the loan that hasn't been getting the credit so far. If you just want credit on the one that is the direct loan and you're willing to pay, or you're close enough to paying off the other loan, then you would not have to, but you would only receive forgiveness on that direct loan.
Okay, excellent. Scott, I'll be sure to forward you the question log that we can send to you for the questions we didn't get to this afternoon. This has been just a terrific information session. We look forward to the second webinar this Wednesday. I'll see you in 2 days, 12:30 Central Time. We have another big registration for that event. But on behalf of Wespath and our participants and the benefit education team here in Glenview, I just want to really thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your patience, and just been really great to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we'll be signing off from Glenview. I want to thank you all for participating in this webinar.